Hello there, welcome to Plus Talk on Plus Life. We're all about turning positive into a plus. Today we are talking about HIV stigma in communities of colour. Joining me is Alana Beaumont. Good to see you again, Alana, from the UK, and Martez Smith in New York. Thanks for both being here.
I'm well. The weather's changing, so I'm happy about that.
I love that we've got all sides of the globe covered in this conversation. Let's dive straight in, shall we? We are talking about HIV stigma in communities of colour, and I'm curious to get from your perspective, Alana, what do you think is the biggest misconception that people have about HIV in your community, where you live, and who you're surrounded by?
I would say it's that it won't happen to me. I think that's a universal one. Won't happen to me. Um, because I think the thing about HIV is it's not something that you contract so easily, and it's not something that um everyone can get quite easily and everyone has. And so I think people feel as though there is a long way for them to actually. So yeah.
What about you, Martez? I see you nodding in agreement there.
Yeah. So I think the perspectives are varied. I do think that here in the United States, particularly in this big, large city, I live in New York City, where I live at. I do think there are remnants of the HIV epidemic that was, widely known to folks in the 80s and the 90s. I think that's embedded in public memory. And so while, the stigma isn't so rampant as it was, I think what you have is kind of more passive type of stigma. So if people are uneducated about HIV, they may, be more susceptible to believing misinformation about it, right? Or just believing that it only affects a certain type of person or a certain set of individuals, right, based on their behaviors. But yeah, that's not necessarily true. So.
Yeah, Ilana, what would you say? Because of the stigma, people are often afraid to get tested. What would you say to somebody who's nervous about getting an HIV test, or because they're afraid of what their friends and family might think?
Yeah, I think health is wealth. I believe that if you have great health in this world, you're doing it right. And knowing what's going on in your body at any given time is the best gift you could give yourself, always. And it's the best gift you can give to yourself and your loved ones also.
Yeah, Martez, we talk about sort of the passive HIV stigma, I guess. A lot of people throw things out joking, quote unquote, jokingly, like, oh, are you clean? That's a term you hear a lot. Or jokingly will say something like, oh, the dude's got AIDS. And while we might be amongst our friends and peers, and we know that it's sort of jokey humor, tell me about the effect that actually can have on a person living with HIV, because that is in of itself a form of stigma too.
Yeah. Well, first, let's start with the person who may be making a joke, where like we may not even know what their status is, right? They may be a person who's living with HIV, and joking or using stigmatizing jokes may be a way for them to cope with it. And they're inadvertently, right, kind of harming others, right, or passively sending the message that even though we can joke about this thing, there's still something inherently wrong with it, right? I think that's the message that kind of the joking statements send. And that's where that passive stigma, that's one of the sources of that passive stigma that I was referring to earlier.
Do you think that's more prevalent in Black and brown communities, or do you think that's across the board? And that's for both of you to answer.
Well, I can speak for other communities. I can just speak to my own personal experiences. I can honestly say that we don't really do a lot of joking about HIV. I will say that it's something that we're definitely comfortable discussing, right? I would say that folks in my friendship group, social circle, generally speaking, are comfortable speaking about HIV, PrEP, etc. So, yeah, acknowledge that that might not be the case for others. So,
Yeah, no, well, absolutely, again, sort of specifically about communities of color, Alana, in your world, in your sphere, do those kind of quote unquote jokes land, and how do you deal with that when you hear, that going on?
I would say, I think when I hear jokes about, not specifically my community, but when I hear jokes about HIV, or people don't say HIV, do they? They say AIDS, say AIDS. So whenever I hear that, I correct it because obviously I'm naturally positive. I know better, and I want them to know better, and I want them to do better as well. So I correct it. I say, well, this is an opportunity for me to educate you on this thing that you clearly know nothing about. So let's just learn together. Well, you're doing the learning more than but let's
Well,
learn together.
yeah, well, I was going to say you both do phenomenal jobs in raising awareness. You're on your social media and what you do in your everyday lives. But how do you approach this topic when you might be around people that you know are uncomfortable talking about HIV? And maybe that's elders within your community, or whether it's in your sort of faith circles where, there's a lot of built-in stigma either because of generations or because of religion. How do you approach those conversations so that you're not alienating people, but you're educating people and you're not being stigmatized at the same time? I'll let you kick that off, Alana, and then Martez, you can follow up.
Again, I go into education mode and I question, I ask. I'll ask teasing questions to see where they're at. And then I will just go back and forth with them and just question their negative beliefs around it really. And I will always add that things have changed, things are different. I will look for something that I can remember that they might have found difficult back in their day and say, hey, well, this was difficult back in your day, and this was different back in your day, and now it's not in our day. And not try to alienate by age, but by willingness to learn. That is a big one. It doesn't matter the age, it's about the willingness to learn something new.
Being open-minded, right,
Being
Martez?
open-minded, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree. I think I take the same approach. And just to add a caveat to that, I often use myself as an example, right? I try to see where people are. I try to meet them where they are, right? I do a quick assessment just to kind of see, if I disclose my status to this person, will they respond in a violent manner, right? So that's safety first. But oftentimes when I find that I'm using myself as an example, in addition to the education, listening to understand and not listening to respond, you know, messages are received, people are much more receptive to new information, their beliefs and their ideas.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also at times, you know, people sort of say, well, we don't really talk about that. We keep things quiet. That's my business, ain't nobody else's business kind of stuff. Keep it quiet. What's the best way for somebody, if they are curious about getting an HIV test or talking about their status, if we're surrounded by people who are like, well, we don't talk about that, what would your advice be for them to talk about it and do it safely and in a comfortable environment?
I would say check in with yourself first, see if it feels safe to do that and to have that conversation in that group. If it's a group, it depends on if it's a group you trust, if it's a group of people you trust, or if it's strangers. But check in with yourself because I find for a lot of HIV positive people, they might find it difficult to talk about being HIV positive. Just say, hey, I'm HIV positive. But for me, that's not an issue for me. I will disclose. I'll just say I'm HIV positive. It's not an issue for me. But and I don't think about actually I don't think in terms of my safety. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm not in an environment to do so. Because I know there are a lot of people around the world who are in an environment where it may end up being something that will get them put them in physical harm or being ostracized from their community. So I don't live in that environment, but I know people who do, and I do know of advocates who do live in that climate, in that situation. So it's not safe for them to do so. But I live in England and I feel like people are more ignorant than in terms of they are ignorant but not abusive. I've encountered
Interesting.
ignorance but not abuse with it. And the ignorance would sort of manifest itself as just asking ignorant questions, as opposed to being physically violent or anything like that. So abuse or hurling abuse. That's in my experience.
Yeah, Martez, in your experience, what role does family and your immediate community play in, I guess, shaping people's views of HIV? And if those are negative views, how do we start changing them kind of from the inside out and turning that around?
So yeah, I feel like the answer is in the question. Like this is one of those things where like, yeah, so literally like, we are not living in vacuums, right? Oftentimes our political beliefs, our political views, our religious ideologies and practices or spiritual practices, even how we view education and how we conceptualize health and wellness and illness in many cases, are often shaped directly by our family and environments and the communities that situated in or are constantly interacting with, right? So, and when you have negative beliefs around, specifically around HIV, kind of permeating those networks, oftentimes I find that education is the way to kind of challenge the stigma that comes along with kind of like negatively ingrained beliefs, some of which are, a result of religious persecution. Sometimes it's just a result of ignorance. Sometimes it's that or other things, right, that we may not be taking into consideration. So yeah, I often find that education, right, and people just knowing and learning about the virus and how it actually works in the body, how it's treated, how widely accessible treatment is, right, and how widely proven it is to work, right. We know that, oftentimes, you get on medication within 30 to 60 days, you get undetectable, and a lot of ailments that come along with having an AIDS diagnosis, right, are alleviated. So yeah.
So, how do you guys both break through to people who just don't want to hear it? But you know within your heart, look, you're a person who needs to hear this. You need to understand this. I'm observing maybe certain behavior or certain patterns. I'm worried about you. I care about you. But they're like, just forget it. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to know about it. How do you break through to someone like that, Alana?
I have found that you don't. Yeah, you don't. Because from their heart, they don't want to hear, they don't want to know. Um, for them, I guess, I think for me, I would say I explain how much health is wealth, and that is just part of an overall encompassing thing that you should care about. It's your health. And if you don't care about your health, and if you're actually I actually always say if you're physically willing to be active with someone, you should be physically willing to go and take a test to make sure that you are healthy enough to engage with said person. I think the gloves come off. I'm not all smiley. I'm not all smiley at all. I'm like, listen, this is not for you. This is not for me. It's for you. Okay.
What about you, Martez? How do you break through to somebody that you might be close with? Could be a friend, could be a sibling, and they just don't want to know about it. How do you get through to them?
Alana, you're right. I take the same approach. A lot of times I'll just offer the information and I'll say, hey, if you ever need to talk about this or if you ever need some guidance around this, I'm here as a resource. And I just kind of leave it alone, and in some instances, right, I hear back from folks. In other cases, I don't, right? So, but the key is for me is just to always make sure that the person knows that that door is always open if they walk through it.
And we'll wrap this up now because we're short on time. But Alana, and again, this is for both of you, but I'll start with you, Alana. What is the one thing you want somebody to hear and understand if they are really struggling with stigma surrounding HIV within the community? What do you want them to know, other than health is wealth?
It's self-love. It's self-love. It's really internalizing the fact that you are not a threat to someone. So I think in the back of an HIV positive person's mind who is struggling with this, they still feel as though they can pass the virus on, then they can't. So they need to do that work, the internal work of learning to destigmatize, really destigmatize, go deep within themselves, and work on that. Because when you understand that it is a viruses need somewhere to live. We have viruses living all over us, well, bacteria, that is. But, there's life teeming on us. HIV just happens to be one of those. And it's only got a stigma towards it because of many political reasons and whatnot from back in the day. And if you let those political reasons really and truly affect you, then you need to really do the internal work and work that out, because you're going to live and you can live happily and you will live long, and HIV won't be the thing that takes you out. That's it.
Great advice. Great advice. What about you, Martez?
I mean, yeah, just in a nutshell, yeah, just exactly like Alana, you said everything that I wanted to say. But HIV is not a death sentence, right? It's not a death sentence, right? So as long as you prioritize taking your medication, you prioritize, working out, eating right, getting your 8 hours of sleep every night, and just living your life, right? Like this literally is a chronic condition when it's treated appropriately. So it's no different than having high blood pressure, diabetes. So yeah, it's not a death sentence. Just focus on your health. And yeah, hopefully things will fall into place.
And get on with living, get on with thriving.
Yeah.
Alana Beaumont Martez Smith, thank you so much for making the time. Alana in the UK, Martez there in New York. It's been a pleasure chatting with you guys.
All right.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
That, of course, that is going to do it for this episode of Plus Talk. What did you think? Leave a comment below. Let us know. And remember, you can like, follow, and share. We're across all your favorite social platforms at Plus Life Media. You can check out the website, pluslifemedia.com. Until next time, be nice to one another. And remember, if you're undetectable, you're untransmittable, you can't transmit the virus. Bye-bye.